My earliest days of sailing were in the Penobscot Bay, in a place called Cape Rosier, where my mother's father had built a house in 1914. And it was there that he learned to sail from a guy named Captain Black, and it was from Captain Black, supposedly, that the words came, "If you wonder if it's time to reef, it's time to reef." These were considered the wisest words of sailing safely, and, you know, they accompanied me along the way. My father loved being there partly because he grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Ganges on Salt Spring Island. And he'd always had a love of sailing, and he was the eldest of 5 boys. And as the stories came down, he always wanted to put the sail up in the boat, and they always wanted to take the sail down. So he would put the sail up, and then they would sneak around and take the sail down. And so he was, I guess, frustrated early on. But he always found, you know, a friend with a boat, or, you know, a boat to sail. And I really learned most of what I knew about sailing from him, and learning on my own in Penobscot Bay. When he died in 1993, his will declared, and I don't know who he thought was going to actually have to do this, but his will declared that he wanted to have 1/3 of his ashes scattered in Penobscot Bay, 1/3 buried in Massachusetts in the little town of Dunstable, where we'd lived in this old farmhouse from 1952 on, and 1/3 scattered in Ganges Harbor. Now, I would just like to counsel anybody leaving behind instructions like this to consider, well, who's actually going to, you know, carry the ashes, because I ended up with the job as the executor of the will. But I'm bringing it up because my mother and my brother and my sister and I went out in the long rowboat that we had for many years to scatter his ashes. And it seems to me we each had some, and we rowed, my mother rowed out to a point, you know, 1,000 yards out. And I remember releasing his ashes into Penobscot Bay. And I don't know how many people have ever actually handled human ashes, but in his case, they were quite white and sort of stony. It was like dropping pebbles into the water. And they fluttered on the way down, the way solid objects do, going down through water. And I remember watching his ashes go down into the ocean with the light coming through and hitting them. And being there with my mother and my sister, and everybody had something, you know, brief to say. And I remember having the thought that you could never really put the pieces together. Like what I had seen go down in the water, my father's remains, what my brother and sister and mother chose to say. You know, were such tiny fragments of such a larger reality that was sort of hopeless. But in realizing it was hopeless, it was sort of wonderful also to realize that, well, of course, it's hopeless. You can't capture a life. You know, you can't even know all the pieces. You can know many of the pieces, and they're the pieces that you choose to seize upon, to say, it's about this, and it's about the way this connects to this. It's really about this. You know, and that will be your version, that'll be your truth about it for a time, until maybe you're influenced to see it differently. And so I think about this in reflecting on kind of where my sailing life began with my father, where my father's, you know, physical life ended, because he died there in that same house, and then scattering his ashes there, and then another, you know, whatever it was, you know, another cupful in Ganges with his brothers and my daughter at the time. that I was really fascinated in trying to pull some of the pieces together, to tell the story that would be, my story of who he was and what he meant.